Isolde Riven never expected the relic hunt to lead her here. She never imagined her hands, calloused from hard work, would touch something so powerful. The medallion, found in the ruins of an ancient floating temple, had a unique glow, almost as if it were alive. When her fingers closed around the cold metal, a wave of energy shot through her body, and she felt something deep inside her stir. Her heart raced, and an intense heat began to spread through her veins, as if she was merging with the very history of the object. But what seemed like a simple discovery was about to turn into a nightmare. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The medallion began to shine even brighter, and an unknown force started to react to her presence. It was like the ancient power of the Ironfang mark had chosen her, and now, everything was about to change. But before she could understand what was happening, a scream cut through the air. From the depths of the shadows, hooded figures appeared, armed with sharp blades and eyes filled with dark intent. The chain cult had found her trail. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if the mark was demanding something from her. Every step felt harder, and the pursuers were closing in fast. Isolde glanced at the medallion in her hand, now burning with power. What was this? Why her? She didn't know, but there was no time for questions. The voices of the cult echoed behind her, and the only thing she could do was run. As she sprinted down the steep path of the ruins, her body was flooded with a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. The mark was connecting her to something bigger, something deeper. But what? Doubt consumed her, and she felt as if she had been drawn into a fate she never chose. The weight of the medallion grew more pronounced, and flashes of ancient images began to appear in her mind. An ancient city, a forgotten war, figures of power who seemed to know her. She had no idea what any of it meant, but she felt like her life would never be the same. She was about to uncover a secret buried deep within time, something that could change the fate of everyone around her. But at that moment, the greatest revelation came with a scream that reached her. The cult was getting closer. Isolde looked back, feeling the fear rise in her chest. She couldn't get caught. Not now. Not when everything was just beginning to make sense. What would she do? Run, or face the truth and the power of the mark pulsing in her chest? The choice was in her hands, and she knew she couldn't escape the responsibility that was about to fall on her. She glanced one last time at the ruins, at the temple, and knew that there, at that moment, was the beginning of something much bigger. The sound of footsteps closing in made her jump. But before she could move, a shadow wrapped around her. She was pulled into the arms of someone, a stranger, with a determined look and an expression of urgency. "Don't worry, I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice low and firm. "But we need to get out of here now." She didn't have time to question him. The man led her through a narrow, winding path where the sounds of the cult grew fainter with every step. Fear pushed her forward, but so did curiosity. Who was he? And what did he want with her? Isolde felt like he knew more about the mark than he was letting on. He seemed to have a purpose, but she still wasn't sure if she could trust him. As they moved in silence, the man suddenly stopped and looked at her, his eyes narrowing as if assessing her every move. "I'm Dorian Callister," he said, his voice deep. "And you're about to get involved in something much bigger than you realize." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words crashing down on her like an avalanche. What did that mean? He wasn't here by accident. He knew something she still didn't understand. And as she looked at him, her intuition told her that Dorian had his own reasons for being part of this story. But what was even more unsettling was what he said next. "You can't escape your destiny, Isolde. The Ironfang mark isn't just a relic, it's the key to a balance that's already in danger." Dorian's words echoed in her mind as she felt a growing weight in her chest. What was he talking about? What balance? And how was she involved in this? The questions multiplied, but she knew the only way to find answers was to keep going. But how far was she willing to go? Their journey was just beginning, and the challenges they would face would soon prove to be more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The chain cult wouldn't give up so easily, and with the mark in her hands, Isolde now found herself at the center of a storm that could consume everything around her. What would she do with the power she now carried? The decision lay before her, and the future of Valcora depended on her choice. Isolde felt the weight of destiny drawing closer, as if the air around her had grown thicker, more charged. The Ironfang mark pulsed in her chest, responding to the call of something bigger than she could imagine. When her eyes met Dorian Callister's for the first time, the feeling that he knew more than he was willing to reveal was unmistakable. He wasn't just an experienced warrior, there was something about his posture, the way he spoke, that seemed to carry the weight of a dark past. Silas Trenner, on the other hand, was the opposite of Dorian, agile, quick with words, and a sarcastic smile on his face, but the seriousness of his mission was clear. Together they formed an unlikely team, but to Isolde they were all she had now. The stormy sea stretched out before them like an immense challenge. It was a place where even legends hesitated to enter, where the winds could rip the soul from anyone who dared face them. The elemental storms made the crossing nearly impossible, but the group, they weren't backing down. She had no choice. Valcora's balance depended on it. Isolde stared out at the horizon, her eyes locked on the raging sea, as a storm gathered in the sky, dark and menacing. The sound of the wind sliced through the air, like the ocean itself was warning them of the danger ahead. But what terrified her even more was the secret she kept inside, the power of the mark. She still had no idea what it meant or what it could do, but she felt a deep connection to it. Something told her the answer was at the end of the journey, but what would she find there? Off the coast, the night was falling, and the three of them were in a small wooden boat, fighting the fury of the waves. Silas, with his quick hands, steered the boat skillfully, but Isolde knew that no matter how good he was, their fate wasn't in their hands, it was in the ancient power she carried. And that, more than anything, made her uneasy. Dorian stared out at the sea with a serious look on his face. He knew the dangers weren't just in the rough waters or the creatures hunting them. The real challenge would be inside each of them, facing their own demons, the choices they'd have to make, and the sacrifice they'd have to pay to make sure the mark didn't fall into the wrong hands. Time passed and the journey felt endless. Isolde, now more aware of her own feelings, wondered what exactly connected them. The mark still pulsed in her chest, but what did it mean for Dorian and Silas? What really united them? Every glance she exchanged with Dorian made her feel like he was hiding something. And Silas, always with a smile on his face, seemed the most confident, but something in his eyes said otherwise. When the storm finally started to calm down, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Isolde knew something was about to change. Finally, they reached the most dangerous point of the journey. The waters of the Tempest Sea were now calm, but the shadows of the mountains in the distance rose like threatening giants. "This is where the real trial begins," Dorian said, not taking his eyes off the mountains, as if he already knew what was coming. The tension between them was thick. Isolde's heart started to race. Dorian's words felt like a promise that the journey wouldn't be easy, and she knew that no matter how hard they tried, they weren't alone in the search for the mark. The cult of the tides was close. On the horizon, the dark shapes of mythical creatures appeared, distant but threatening. They were coming closer. The silence was broken by a shout from Silas, pointing to the sky. The shadows were taking shape, as if the night itself was turning into an army of nightmares. "They're here," Dorian said, urgency in his voice. But Isolde, unlike the two men beside her, didn't let herself be shaken. She knew the secret of the mark was closer than ever. It was time to act, and the choice she made now would be crucial. The wind that rose with the arrival of the mystical creatures brought a biting cold, but also a sense of purpose. The mark pulsed inside Isolde like an extension of herself. Something was being revealed. She looked at Dorian and Silas, who were ready for battle. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew her decision would define everything. It was a moment of courage, and the fate of Valcora was in her hands. But what awaited her in the coming hours? Only time would tell, but what Isolde knew more than anything was that nothing would be the same again. And what would she do with the power of the mark? That was about to be revealed. And as the battle drew closer, the air carried a feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Isolde's real journey was about to begin, and she knew she couldn't turn back now. The creatures were getting closer, and the truth she was searching for was closer than ever. The silence of the night was shattered by the heavy sound of the creatures' footsteps. Isolde, Dorian, and Silas were in position, ready to face whatever came, but the fear was palpable, like the air itself was charged with electric tension. The cult of the tides was closer than ever. A distant scream echoed through the mountains, a grim warning that the forces of darkness were on their way. With every step they took toward the abyss opening in front of them, Isolde felt the pressure on her shoulders grow, as if the weight of a dark destiny was finally taking shape. Silas was the first to break the silence. his usual smile now replaced by an expression of pure focus. "We can't let them get here first. The mark needs to be protected." His words were short but loaded with deep meaning. Dorian, with his eyes fixed on the darkness surrounding them, replied firmly, "The cult won't back down that easily. They know the power we carry and they're willing to do whatever it takes to take it from us." The tension was thick in the air, but Isolde, though aware of the impending danger, couldn't deny the fact that the closer she got to the cult, the more answers about her destiny started to surface. Something inside her was changing, as if the mark was reacting to the enemy's approach. As they moved forward, the shadows of the mountains seemed to stretch, coming to life. The cold, biting winds were now heavy with a sinister presence. The thick fog made it hard to see, but Isolde felt like they were being watched. She could hear the distant whispers of a cult, hidden in the mist, their words hollow like promises of power and destruction. Dorian remained silent, his muscles tense, as if every step was a preparation for the confrontation he knew was about to happen. Then the figures began to materialize in the shadows. They wore dark hoods, their forms tall and thin, like specters in the moonlight. It was as if the darkness itself had swallowed them. They moved with a fluidity that didn't seem human. The cult of the tides was right in front of them, like a black tide, about to consume everything in its path. Isolde felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't back down. She knew she couldn't hesitate now. Whatever fate she carried, it was no longer a choice but a necessity. Whatever came next, she would face with courage. The leaders of the cult, known as the Archons, approached with heavy steps, their dominant, crushing presence filling the air. The leader, a woman with hollow eyes, locked gazes with Isolde. "You don't know what you're carrying, kid. The Iron Fang mark belongs to us. You can't escape your fate." Her voice was soft, but filled with immense power, like each word was a sentence. Dorian stepped forward, but the woman stopped him with a simple gesture. "The warrior can't stop us. Her fate is already sealed." Isolde felt a growing heat in her chest, the mark pulsing intensely, almost as if it were responding to the cult's presence. She knew she was in the middle of something way bigger than she could understand. The strength in her hand seemed to grow, but at the same time, a deep terror rooted itself in her heart. The cult knew more than she did, and that scared her. The woman, an Archon with an ethereal look, continued, "The power you're seeking, Isolde, it's not what you think. It will bring destruction. It's not yours to control." Isolde shook her head, trying to ignore the words, but doubt started to creep in. The mark burned in her chest, stronger with every passing second, and the Archon's words dug deep into her mind. Dorian, who had stayed silent, looked at Isolde as if waiting for an answer from her. "Don't listen to them. They'll try to twist your mind, so fear. We can't let them take what's ours." Dorian's words reminded her of why they were on this journey. He knew the path ahead would be darker than anything they had ever faced, but what was at stake was bigger than the cult's threats. Silas, always the impulsive one, moved forward with a gleaming blade, defying the Archon's oppressive presence. "It doesn't matter what they say, we're not stopping. We'll do whatever it takes." He charged ahead, but before he could take another step, the Archons raised their hands, and the air filled with dark energy. A blast of dark light engulfed the group, and the battlefield turned into a chaos of raw power. The shockwave nearly knocked Isolde to her knees, but she felt the mark pulse with an even stronger energy. It was like everything around her was distorting, and the only thing left was her and the power she was about to unleash. In the heart of the battle, Isolde found herself facing a decision she could no longer delay. The Iron Fang mark was more than just a mark. It was a key. A key to something immense, something she could no longer deny. With a scream, she raised her hands, feeling the energy surge through her body. The mark shone brightly, lighting up the darkness around her. A wave of power radiated from her, throwing the Archons back. The creatures surrounding them retreated, and for a moment, silence took over the field. Isolde breathed deeply, feeling the strength beginning to dominate her being. But the battle was far from over. The Archon's words echoed in her mind, and she knew the confrontation was just beginning. The cult of the chains wouldn't back down so easily, and Isolde had much to learn about the power she was just starting to understand. What would come next, no one could predict, but Valcora's fate was undoubtedly in her hands. The biting wind howled through the rocky hills, carrying the scent of wet earth and something more, something distant and ancient. The ruins ahead of Dorian, Isolde, and Silas seemed simple at first glance, But as they drew closer, the true magnitude of the place revealed itself. The ancient stones, covered in moss and tangled with deep roots, whispered stories of a time long past. A time when magic was pure and the bloodlines of the guardians ruled the world's fate. The feeling of being watched never left. The silence was deep, yet heavy with an invisible presence. Isolde felt the weight of the air on her shoulders, as if the earth itself was aware of their arrival. She knew this wasn't just any ruin. It was a place filled with secrets, mysteries that had been dragged through generations. Silas, ever the alert one, was the first to touch the stones, feeling the vibrations in his fingertips. "Something's not right here," he muttered, as if sensing the danger radiating from the place. Dorian, usually the unshakable one, was quiet, his eyes fixed on a distant point. He felt, just like the others, that this was more than just another step in their journey. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that, when revealed, would change everything. "These ruins aren't like the others we've seen," Dorian said finally, his voice low. "There's more here than just stones. There's a story that still needs to be told." He stepped closer to a large stone door, carved with arcane symbols that seemed to move as his hand approached. The faint glow of the runes lit up his face, reflecting the intensity of the moment. "This door? It doesn't want to be opened," he concluded, his expression a mix of caution and curiosity. Isolde watched closely. Her mark, still burning fiercely, seemed to react to the presence of the place. The energy pulsing through her was even stronger now, as if an invisible link was being formed between her and the ruins. "We need to open this," she whispered. "I can feel it. There's something inside. Something that might give us the answers we're looking for." But as she said that, a chill ran down her spine. Something deep in her heart told her that opening that door would release more than just answers. It would release something that had been trapped for a long time. Silas observed Isolde's decision, but before he could protest, she reached out and touched the door. The stones vibrated, and with a deep sound, the door began to slowly open. A golden glow emerged from within the ruins, lighting up Dorian and Silas's faces, but the light wasn't comforting. It was as if something ancient and primal had been awakened. The air around them grew heavier, and the earth it seemed to tremble slightly beneath their feet. "This doesn't look good," Silas said, his eyes squinting, but still not hesitating as he got ready for whatever was coming. But there's no turning back now. Inside the room, a massive chamber unfolded, and in the center, a stone altar was covered with a thick layer of dust, but something was shining on top of it. It was an object that seemed simple, yet at the same time carried a lot of complexity. A key. A key made of a metal that almost looked ethereal, with symbols etched into its surface. The key to what? Isolde approached cautiously, but a voice whispered in her mind, "Don't touch it." She paused for a moment, but curiosity won out, and she reached out her hand. As soon as she touched the key, a wave of energy surged through her body, and a distant, almost ethereal scream echoed in the chamber. Dorian quickly moved closer, grabbing her arm to stop her from going any further, but it was too late. The key seemed to have fused with her skin, and a new mark appeared, darker, more imposing, and pulsing with a threatening energy. The air grew even heavier, and the ruins began to react to her presence. "Isolde!" Dorian shouted, trying to pull her back, but she was stuck, as if she had become part of the key itself. The energy emanating from her was uncontrollable. The altar in front of them started glowing with a golden light, but there was also a shadow starting to form at the edges of the room. Something was being awakened, something far more dangerous than the cult of the chains. Isolde could feel it. It wasn't just the key connecting with her. It was something deeper, something she still didn't understand, but something she could no longer deny. The room trembled violently, and the stones started moving on their own. As if reacting to the key, the stones of the chamber pulled away from the ground, forming a circle around them. A portal began opening in the center of the room, a rift of pure energy that seemed to suck everything around it. "This is not going to be easy," Silas said, looking at Dorian, who was now watching Isolde with a mix of worry and fascination. With a scream, Isolde was engulfed by the light, and for a moment, it felt like everything around her was disappearing. Dorian felt the growing pressure, felt time itself distorting, but he knew the only way forward was to face whatever was coming. Whatever that portal was, they would have to cross it. They had to move forward, no looking back, because the answers they were seeking were right there, in the ruins, in the key, in the very portal that was now daring them to dive into the unknown. Isolde, though scared, felt a force inside her she'd never experienced before. The Iron Fang mark was pulsing with wild energy, as if she had finally found her purpose. But what she didn't know, what she still had to discover, was that this portal wasn't just a path to answers. It was a journey that would test her very humanity. What would she do from here? The future was opening before her, but it carried a cost no one could foresee. The intense light of the chamber seemed to swirl around them, as if the very essence of the place was trying to devour everything it touched. Isolde, still wrapped in the energy of the key, stood still for a moment, her eyes glowing with a mix of fear and fascination. The portal ahead of them expanded, its golden light now surrounded by pulsating shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in space. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn there, creating a rift that didn't belong to this world. Dorian took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Isolde, who now seemed to be the key to the whole mystery. The air was thick with palpable tension, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Silas, by his side, looked at the portal with distrust, as if something there was trying to manipulate them. "I don't like this, Dorian," Silas said, his voice low. "This portal, it's not just a path to the unknown. It's more like a trap. Something's waiting on the other side." Dorian couldn't deny the growing sense that they were getting closer to something far bigger than anything they'd faced before. "We don't have a choice, Silas. If we want the answers, we have to go through," Dorian said, his voice firm. He looked at Isolde, whose eyes were now void of any fear, only silent determination. The portal seemed to have taken a part of her, as if it was absorbing her essence. Isolde closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the energy of the key connect with something inside her. Her mark burned with intensity, responding to the call of the portal. It was as if her destiny had finally aligned with what was about to happen. She knew, with a chilling clarity, that whatever lay beyond that portal was a revelation that would change everything. And she was ready to face the unknown. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, entering the circle of light and shadows that formed the portal. Dorian and Silas immediately followed her, their weapons ready, senses sharp, aware that the journey they were about to begin was more dangerous than anything they'd ever faced. As they crossed the rift, the air grew icy, the sensation of reality bending around them. The sound of the chamber faded, replaced by a deep, constant hum, as if space itself was being compressed and expanded at an impossible speed. When they finally stepped out the other side, the world around them felt different. The light was dim, a constant shadow hanging over everything. The trees, if they could even be called that, were twisted and gray, their branches looking more like bones than wood. The ground, it was covered by a thick layer of mist that dragged along, making it hard to see far ahead. But, despite the weirdness of the place, there was something even more unsettling. The silence. It was absolute. There wasn't a sound, like time itself didn't dare make a noise here. "We're in a different place," Isolde said, her voice breaking the oppressive silence. She looked around, her eyes scanning the shadows moving at the edges of her vision, like something was watching her. "But this doesn't feel real." "Doesn't feel real," Dorian agreed, cautiously looking around. "It's like we've crossed into another plane of existence, some limbo between worlds." He tightened his grip on the key in his hand, which now felt even heavier, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. "This is no ordinary place. We gotta stay alert." Silas, with his hand on his sword, looked toward the horizon for any signs of movement. "I don't like this. Where are the monsters? Where are the enemies?" he asked, half mocking, half worried. "This place is stalking us. I can feel it." Isolde moved closer to one of the twisted trees, touching its rough, cold bark. "This isn't a place for any human. Maybe it's an ancient battlefield, a forgotten land. Something here died, or was sealed." She stepped back, glancing toward what looked like a distant structure, a dark tower rising from the fog. "Look there. That's our destination." The tower seemed to be waiting for them, a shadow stretching across the world around it. Dorian felt the weight of the key in his hand, and the sense that everything they'd done so far had been leading them to this moment. It was like the key wasn't just a tool, but a symbol of what was to come. What they were searching for was inside that tower, and maybe the answers they were looking for would be revealed there, but he also knew there was something deeper. Something waiting for them, patient, ready to be awakened. Whatever it was inside the tower. And they couldn't turn back. They'd have to face the shadows that were about to reveal themselves, the true face of the destiny that now awaited them. Isolde, Dorian, and Silas prepared to move forward, not knowing exactly what they'd find, but knowing they couldn't go back. The portal of shadows had been crossed, and the real test was just beginning. The tower ahead of them loomed, dark and imposing, like a scar on the landscape. The dense fog that surrounded it seemed to suck the light out of the air, creating a darkness that defied all logic. The three of them moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the deep silence that made the tension in the air even heavier. The destiny they'd been searching for was closer than ever, but the path to it seemed full of invisible dangers, like the very land was trying to stop them. Isolde, now more focused than ever, gripped the key firmly. The energy of the mark pulsed as if she was connecting with something bigger, something beyond her understanding. Dorian felt the weight of the responsibilities placed on his shoulders, but he also knew he couldn't fail. The thin line between success and failure had never been so clear. Silas, with his impassive stance, kept watch, always alert. He knew the real test was about to begin, and that what awaited them inside the tower wouldn't be easy. As they approached the entrance, the door of the tower opened by itself, a deep, low sound reverberating through the ancient stones. A cold wind blew from within, bringing with it a smell of something old, something that had been forgotten for a long time. The darkness inside seemed to swallow any trace of light, creating a sense of oppression. But at the same time, something was pulling them toward that abyss. A distant call, almost imperceptible but impossible to ignore. Isolde was the first to enter, followed by Dorian and Silas. Inside, the walls were covered with ancient symbols, etched into the stone in a way that seemed impossible. Each of them seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if they were guardians of some ancient secret. As they moved forward, the air grew heavier, and the feeling that they were being watched intensified with every step. They reached a large room, its walls rising until they were lost in the darkness. In the center, a stone platform stood, and on it, a glowing sphere, pulsating with a golden light as if it were alive. Dorian felt the key in his hand vibrate, an instant response to the power of the sphere. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than to the others. "This is where it all gets resolved." Isolde moved toward the platform, her mark now glowing with an intensity that lit up the dark surroundings. She knew what to do. The key was placed on the sphere, and the moment it made contact with the crystal, a wave of energy swept through the room, knocking all three of them to their knees as if the force of a storm had hit them. The walls began to vibrate, the symbols on the stones coming to life, and the sound of an ancient voice echoed through the halls, deep and full of power. "You are the chosen ones. The legacy of the Guardians has been restored." The voice was ancient, and the weight of history it carried was almost unbearable. But at the same time, there was a sense of relief that what they had done hadn't been in vain. Isolde, Dorian, and Silas got back up, their bodies shaking but their minds clearer than ever. The power of the key had unleashed the legacy of the Guardians, and with it, a new era was about to begin. But as the power of the sphere dissipated, a new vision formed before them. A dark shadow, a presence that seemed to dominate everything around it. Azrael, the Soul Devourer. Its form materialized, a giant entity, its presence threatening and full of malice. Its eyes burned with the promise of destruction, and its voice came out like a deep growl. "You thought restoring the legacy would be the end? The real test is just beginning." Dorian, Isolde, and Silas were ready to face whatever came next. They knew the battle was far from over. The legacy had been awakened, but the sacrifice was still needed, and the destiny that awaited them was grander and more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. With their weapons firmly in hand and the fate of the world on their shoulders, they moved forward, ready to face the darkness, to restore the balance, and to discover that true power wasn't just in the legacy but in their own choices. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The path ahead would be an epic battle where only the strongest would survive. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. See you in the next video.